Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are diving right into the absolute heart of coding in Python. If you've ever wanted to really get how programming works right from the very beginning, then you are in exactly the right place. So to get us started, let's ask a really simple question. So think about it. Any app, any website, any game you play, how does it remember your name or your high score or what you left in your shopping cart last week? It's not magic, right? It needs some kind of system, a way to actually store and retrieve all that information. And that system is built on one simple concept, a variable. Honestly, the best way to picture a variable is just as a labeled box. That's it. You put a piece of information inside the box and you slap a label on the outside so you can find it again later. In code, the name of the variable is the label, and the data you put inside is called the value. And making one in Python, it's super easy. It's really just a three-step dance. First, you pick a name for your box. That's the label. So here we'll use message. Second, you use the equal sign. Think of this as the put this in the box command. And third, you give it the actual item, the value. In this case, it's the text hello. And boom, just like that, you've stored a piece of information. Now, you can't just label these boxes whatever you feel like. Python's got a couple of simple rules you gotta follow. The name has to start with either a letter or an underscore. It just can't start with a number or some other funky character. It's just Python's way of keeping everything neat and tidy so it doesn't get confused. Okay, so we've got our storage boxes, our variables. The next big question is, what kind of stuff can we actually put in them? Well, let's take a look at the most basic building blocks of data in Python. First up, we've got integers, or int for short. These are just your plain old whole numbers, no fractions, no decimals. Think of things like your age, the number of steps you took today, or the current year. Simple, solid numbers like 42 or even -10. But what happens when you need something a bit more precise? Well, that's where floats come in. A float is just any number that has a decimal point. It's perfect for stuff like prices, exact measurements, or, a famous mathematical constant like pi. Of course, life isn't all about numbers. When we need to store text, we use strings, which is short for str. Anything, and I mean anything, you wrap in single or double quotes becomes a string. It could be a name, a whole sentence, or even just one single letter. And finally, we have one of the most powerful simple types, the bool, or bool. A boolean is like a light switch. It can only ever have one of two values, true or false. And a really important detail here, you have to capitalize that T and F. This is absolutely crucial for asking questions in your code like, hey, is this user logged in? The answer will be either true or false. Now, here's a really cool part. You don't actually have to tell Python what type of data you're storing. It just figures it out on its own. But if you ever get curious and want to check what kind of item is inside one of your boxes, you can use this handy little function called type. It'll tell you exactly what you're dealing with. Okay, so we've got our different boxes with different kinds of items inside. But what happens when we try to make them interact with each other? This is where understanding these types becomes so important. Let's see what happens when we mix them up. This table shows it all perfectly. You can actually multiply a string, like Python, by a number, and Python just repeats it for you. Pretty neat. And if you multiply an integer by a float, Python gives you back a float because it wants to be as precise as possible. But look at that last one. What happens if you try to add the word Python to the number 2? You get an error. Python basically throws up its hands and says, that makes no sense. I don't know how to do that. And that right there is why types matter so much. All right, time for a little pop quiz. Get ready for a weird one. Based on what we just saw, this should probably be an error, right? I mean, we're trying to add a number to a Boolean. What in the world do you think happens here? The answer is 11. Crazy, right? This is one of those fascinating little quirks in Python. When you use a Boolean in a math problem, Python secretly treats true as the number 1 and false as the number 0. So what you're really asking it to do is just calculate 10 plus 1. But, and this is a really big but, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. The source material is crystal clear about this. While it's a cool trick to know, mixing Booleans and numbers like this can make your code incredibly confusing for anyone else who has to read it. So the professional advice is simple. Just don't do it. So far, every box we've talked about holds just one single item. But what if you need to store, say, a whole shopping list of items or a phone book? Well, Python has you covered. Let's take a quick peek at some of the more advanced ways to organize your data. Now, we're not going to dive deep into these today. Think of this more as a sneak peek of what comes next. You got things like lists, which are ordered and changeable. You have tuples, which are kind of like lists, but you can't change them once they're made. Dictionaries are for storing key value pairs, like a real dictionary. And sets are just for keeping a collection of unique items. These are your next level of organization. All right, let's bring it all back home.
We've talked about variables, our boxes. We've talked about the basic types of things we can put in them. Why is mastering this so absolutely essential? Because what you've just seen is the absolute bedrock of programming. I'm not exaggerating. Understanding how to store, label, and use data isn't just a feature of Python. It's the core grammar of the language. Everything else you will ever build, from the simplest script to the most complex app, is built on these powerful, simple ideas.
And that leads me to one final kind of mind-bending thought. We've been treating our variables like simple, boring boxes. But what if the boxes themselves could have their own special abilities, their own behaviors? Well, that is the big idea behind something called object-oriented programming, and it is a perfect topic for another day. Thanks for joining me.